Welcome in this video of the House of Asian Cinema. That's a video which has been requested by one of my subscribers, Lakbar Ben. He wanted me to comment on the filmography of Chow Yun-fat. So I'm going to try this exercise, but as you can guess, Chow Yun-fat has made a lot of films, so it's going to take a lot of time, so I'm going to cut it in several videos, probably 3 of them. So I will try doing this exercise, commenting on each films of Chow Yun-fat I've seen so far. A couple of preliminary observations. I've seen many Chow Yun-fat films, but obviously I haven't seen all of them. So I will only discuss the one I've seen. On many of those films, I've seen them a long time ago, and I haven't been able to rewatch them for this video. There are just too many of them, and I just don't have enough time to do that. So sometimes my memory will be a bit limited on some of them, so I may do a couple of mistakes down there. I may also give some very vague details about the story, about the performances of Chow Yun-fat, so I apologize for that. If I do any mistakes, don't hesitate to correct me in the comments. I won't take it bad, it's okay, it's normal. I mean, if I do mistakes, I need to be corrected, so don't hesitate to do it. Personally, I've never met Chow Yun-fat. I tried a couple of times to do some interview with him, but that never worked. It's not that surprising. These kind of very, very big stars are difficult to approach. They are not that much willing to do promotions on the films they are participating in, because promotion is basically annoying for them, and I understand that. Some of my friends managed to get picture with him, because Chow Yun-fat is known to like to hike around Hong Kong. So if you are doing some hiking, there is a good chance that you may actually meet Chow Yun-fat at some point. If you are brave enough to talk to him and ask to do a picture with him, he will most probably accept to do it. I have a couple of friends who have been able to have a picture with him this way. But even if I haven't met him, I've interviewed a lot of people who have worked with him. And there is a clear consensus about Chow Yun-fat being one of the nicest men in the industry. Really, I never heard anybody say anything negative about Chow Yun-fat. They are all extremely positive about him. And when you have such a consensus on someone, that probably means that he is indeed a very nice and very kind man. So that's a good thing to know. It's always better when you appreciate someone and you know that he is indeed a great actor, but also a very nice human being. So, without further ado, let's start with the commentary of Chow Yun-fat's filmography. And I will start in 1976 with a film called Massage Girls. And that's one of those films where I don't have much memory of it, to be honest. When you are doing, obviously it's a film about prostitution, and when you are doing a film about prostitution, there are 2 ways you can deal with it. The first one is to really deal with it in a realistic way, with having a social message about prostitution, and the second way is to do it as exploitation with a lot of eroticism. Massage Girls is more on this second category. It's clearly exploitation, but it's exploitation done in a very rough and not convincing way. I mean, it's exploitation, but which don't even dare to go where it should go. So there is not much eroticism. The parts where there is eroticism are badly handled. The photography is just atrocious for the most part. So as you can see, it's basically a bad movie. And Chow Yun-fat has a supporting part. I can't remember clearly, to be honest, what he does in the film. I think he's a kind of customer or something. But it was not convincing. Not because of Chow. I think he does as much as he can with the material he has been given, but just because it's a bad film which was made for bad reasons and with a bad crew. So yeah, no need to stay too much on it. It's a bad film. Chow Yun-fat is very young. That's basically the only point of interest of this film. And if you want to see a good film, just forget it. The only interest of this film is basically to see Chow Yun-fat young. So I moved to another film made the year after and called Hot Blood. And Hot Blood is it's a cop story. So when you are watching a Chow Yun-fat film made before '86, made before A Better Tomorrow, and you see it's a cop or gangster story, you always think, oh, maybe he did something good in this genre before A Better Tomorrow. So you always have a bit of expectation because of Chow Yun-fat's participation in A Better Tomorrow. But I'm sorry to burst the bubble because he actually never did a good cop or gangster story. Well, with one exception, which we will come to later. But for the most part, that didn't happen. On the couple of films he did in this genre before '86 were just very dull and very bad. And Hot Blood is one of them. It's very dull. It's slow. It doesn't really know where it wants to go. It's one of those cops and gangster story, but before the new wave, when they were still kind of new with the genre and they were not really able to know clearly what they wanted to do with it. So it's not really convincing. I don't even remember what Chow Yun-fat does in the film, so I don't think his performance was bad or anything, but it's just what the film is. It's not a convincing film in any way, and so Chow Yun-fat could not do anything convincing either. So yeah, another film in the early Chow Yun-fat's career, which is to skip, I'm afraid. Now the next film is another case. It's Siba, directed by Denis Yu in 1980. And Denis Yu is one of the directors from the Hong Kong New Wave, and is unfortunately one which is quite often forgotten when we are talking about the Hong Kong New Wave. Despite having done really good films such as The Beast or The Imp. And unfortunately, Siba is not one of his most memorable films. Quite the opposite. It's probably the less interesting one he has done during that period of the Hong Kong New Wave. But it doesn't mean that the film is a complete failure, because it actually has some early elements of gambling film, which would be made more popular later by people like Wong Ting. So you have elements of that. You have some good ideas there and there. You have Chow Yun-fat playing the main part, and is actually quite convincing. But the execution is not that convincing, unfortunately. It's not that successful. There are individual scenes which are okay. There are some good ideas there and there, but Denis Yu doesn't manage to make it as a good film. He doesn't manage to bring all those elements into one film which would make sense. So it's quite a frustrating experience to see the film, because you see the potential, you see what it could be, what could be made out of it, but unfortunately it just doesn't deliver. And so if you want to watch early Chow Yun-fat, you are curious about them, Siba is probably one of the most interesting one. It's not a good film, it's a failure, but it's a failure which had a lot of potential, which is more than I can say from the other films I've been commented so far. Fortunately, the next film I'm going to talk about is a success, artistic success, and was a fairly okay commercial success as well. That's The Story of Wu Viet, directed by Anh Ooi. So Story of Wu Viet was part of what we call the Vietnamese trilogy from Anh Ooi, with The Boy from Vietnam, which was made for TV, and Boat People. And they are all interesting films. Story of Wu Viet as Chow Yun-fat as Boat People, as a Vietnamese refugee. He has to leave Vietnam following the victory of the North, and he finds refuge in Hong Kong, and he has to become some kind of private assassin in order to survive, and he falls in love with another girl in the same kind of condition as him, played by Choi Chung. Choi Chung, we were just started. It was his second or third film, I think it's second film, after the Johnny To's Enigmatic Caves. And he follows her. They try to escape to the US, but they end up being in the Philippines, and once again Chow Yun-fat has to keep killing people for money in order to try to survive, and try to save Choi Chung from being used by a dangerous gangster. So it's a new wave film, so it has this gritty, realistic vibe. It's also an Hanoi film. That means that the characters are very well developed, and she's able to get some very good performance from the actors. That's basically the first real good film from Chow Yun-fat, the first real good performance is able to deliver, and where you can see all the potential he has to become a superstar. It's a good film. It's a really recommended film. It has been re-released, I think, recently in Hong Kong. It has also been released actually for the first time, I think, in France a couple of 1 or 2 years ago now, by Spectrum Film. So if you are able to understand Cantonese, I suggest you buy the Spectrum Film version, because there is also an interview with Teddy Robin Kwan, which I was able to do, who was the producer of the film. So if you understand Cantonese, that's probably the best version of the film to buy. If you need English, unfortunately the Spectrum Film won't be the release of choice for you, because it's only subtitled in French. Anyway, you should check Story of Woo Viet, very good film, and one of the early good performance from Chow Yun-fat. The year after, in 1982, he appeared in Postman Strikes Back. Postman Strikes Back, it's once again a bit like Sibar, one of those frustrating films, because you see that everything in order to be a successful film, to be a good film, but the execution, the final result is not up to where you could expect it to be. The film was directed by Ronnie Yu, with the action handled by Yuen Woo-ping and his brothers. It has Chow Yun-fat as the main actor. There is also Leung Kar-yan, if I remember correctly. And it was shot in South Korea during winter. So it has a bit this adventure western vibe, with Chow Yun-fat being some kind of bounty hunter, if I remember correctly. So it's a good concept, it's a good idea, but the execution is not that successful in my opinion. It's not a bad film. It's certainly watchable, it's entertaining, but it doesn't go as far as you could expect it to be. And if I remember correctly, Chow Yun-fat was wounded during the shooting of this film. Chow Yun-fat is a great, he's known as an action actor because of his participation to films like A Better Tomorrow, like The Killer, his John Woo collaboration basically. And he is indeed very convincing when it comes to using guns and stuff. But when he is into real physical action, which was more the forte of the Yun clan back then in the early 80s, which was more a bit kung fu style, he is not really that convincing. So is not that great in the film when it comes to action, and is heavily doubled, partially because he was wounded, partially because I think he's not that good in this department in the first place. So Postman Fights Back, some people like it. It has a pretty good reputation. I'm not that convinced personally, but it's certainly worth a try, worth a look. The same year, in '82, he also appeared in The Headhunter. The Headhunter, it was a mess of a production. I won't go too much in detail because I've written about it in the book, which will be released at the end of the year, early next year. The biography of Choi Ark I've done. but be aware that the film was a complicated production. Many people were involved in order to save it from complete disaster. It's too bad. I think that's because of this complicated production, the film didn't deliver. While it had some good idea, once again there is this story of Wu Viet vibe, because Chow Yun-fat is traumatized. Is someone who has been in Vietnam, and he has been traumatized by the events there, and is assassin to hire. So there are some similarities with story of Wu Viet, but it's much less convincing than the Hanoi film. And what is the real standout of the film, unfortunately, is not Chow Yun-fat, even if he does what he can. I mean, it's fairly convincing given what he has to work with, but it's not memorable. What is more memorable, in my opinion, is Rosamund Kwan. It was one of her first film. I think it is her first film. I'm not completely sure, but one of her very early film, and she was extremely, and she was really convincing, really beautiful, obviously, in the film, and she makes a much more striking impression than Chow Yun-fat, in my opinion. So The Headhunter, interesting try, but unfortunately a mess because of the difficult production the film had. We move to 1983 and we go to The Last Affair, directed by Tony Ho. Tony Ho, he was a former artistic director. He's someone with a real sensitivity, and he's someone who I think is a good director, but who never got the credit he should have had. Last Affair is one of his early films. Once again, I think it is his first film. It's basically a love story, a triangular love story with Chow Yun-fat and two other girls whose name escape me right now. I think there is Dudu, and I'm not sure about the third one. It's an interesting, a very low-key love story. It's not completely mastered. I think Tony Ho would do better films later on, but it has a real sensitivity, it has a real care for the character, and that makes the difference compared to other films which were being made during that time. It's also shot in Paris, and so that brings a real different atmosphere to what you are used to. If you have been to Paris and if you have lived in Paris like me, that's really funny to see Chow Yun-fat being in this environment, which it doesn't necessarily belong to originally. So that brings a special flavor to the film. The film is okay. It's not a masterpiece. It's not a great film, but it's an interesting film with an interesting performance from Chow Yun-fat, a fairly strong one. So I would recommend it. I would recommend you the whole filmography of Tony Ho, actually. And he has worked a couple more times with Chow Yun-fat. There are a couple more films after this one. There is one, actually. So yeah, I recommend the collaboration of Tony Ho and Chow Yun-fat, and the filmography of Tony Ho in general. Then we move to 1984 with Love in a Fallen City. Once again, it's a collaboration with Hanoi. Love in a Fallen City was produced by the Shaw Brothers. That's one of the last big films of the Shaw Brothers before they closed their doors the year after. It's an adaptation of a book by Eileen Cheng. Eileen Cheng is one of the most famous modern female Chinese writer of the 20th century. And usually all stories deal with women and the difficulty of being a woman in a Chinese traditional environment with all the social pressure you have to deal with. And so that's the case here. That's exactly the story of Love in a Fallen City. We see such a woman who is played by Cora Miao, and who has to deal with desire, with her love, but cannot completely assume it because of the traditional Chinese values, and this love will be put to the test when she meets a very suave, a bit westernized gentleman being played by Chow Yun-fat. And Chow Yun-fat really looks great in this film. He's always in this white suit, which really fits him very well. He's really the perfect incarnation of this kind of playboy you could imagine from the 30s, a bit westernized, a bit elegant. He is really great in the film. The film is also set it's set at the end of the 30s, early 40s, so you see the invasion of Japan, of Hong Kong in 1941, which is something which was not often shown in Hong Kong films, so it's really interesting to see it. The film was also shot in an hotel in Repulse Bay, which was very colonial looking and which was destroyed just after the shooting. So that's the last image we have of this hotel, and it really brings this colonial atmosphere and really makes the film interesting. I have some reservation regarding the film because of the passivity of the main character. I really have difficulty with characters which were so passive. I really don't like it. I want to shake them and I want to tell them do something. But anyway, that's how it is in Eileen Chang's writing, so it's not that surprising. But if you, like me, you are a bit allergic to this kind of passive characters, that can be a problem. But anyway, despite this flaw, it's a good film. It's an interesting film, and it's certainly worth to check for the quality of the film itself and for the interpretation of Chow Yun-fat in it. 1984 was clearly the year where filmmakers in Hong Kong were interested in the Japanese invasion of Hong Kong for some obvious political reasons. If you want to know why that was the case, you can check the history of Hong Kong and you will see that in 1984 there was a very important decision which was taken for the colony, and so it was used, this historical background was used to comment on the current situation in Hong Kong in 1984. But anyway, so there was another film dealing with the occupation of Hong Kong by the Japanese made that year, and that was Hong Kong 1941, and Chow Yun-fat was in it as well. So we are back to a classical triangular love relationship with Chow Yun-fat, Cecilia Yip, and Alex Mann. This trio has to deal with the feelings that the two men have for the woman, and during the very difficult time of the Japanese occupation of Hong Kong. The reconstitution is pretty good. It's probably as good. I mean, in Love in the Fallen City, we don't really see that much the occupation. We mostly see the invasion. And so in Hong Kong 1941, we see more the occupation by the Japanese. So two different aspects of this historical period. And so that makes the film kind of complementary in a way. The film was directed by Po Chi Leung, who is a very uneven director. I think Hong Kong 1941 is actually one of his best work. It's a quality film. It had quite wide release. It was released on Hong Kong Legend, for example, the Hong Kong Legend label. You should not have too much difficulty to find it. It's a good film. It's a good performance by Chow Yun-fat and all the actors, so it's really worth watching it. After this string of quality film for Chow Yun-fat, it's back to the mediocre with The Occupant, directed by Ronnie Yu. And the problem here is not Ronnie Yu. The problem is not Chow Yun-fat. The film is mostly known because that was the first time Chow Yun-fat got to work with Sally Ye. So a few years before they made The Killer together. But if you expect the same kind of spark that there was in The Killer, you are going to be sadly disappointed, because The Occupant, as I said, is a fairly mediocre film. The love relationship between Sally and Chow Yun-fat is okay. It's nothing really great, but I guess it does the job. The main problem is not Chow Yun-fat, the main problem is not Sally Ye, the main problem is the third main actor of the film, and that is Raymond Wong. Raymond Wong, which you probably know for the Happy Ghost series, who was a popular comedy actor during the 80s and who was a producer for Cinema City, and who later would produce the Ip Man series, the Bride with White Hair. He's not that bad as a producer, but as a comedy actor, he's unbearable, and he's really at his worst in The Occupant. He really kills the film. If you like Raymond Wong as a comedy actor, then check The Occupant. You are going to love it. But personally, I find it unbearable, and it really dragged the film down, and I would not recommend it at all. In 1985, Chow Yun-fat appeared in Why Me. Why Me is a film by Ken Cheng, and Ken Cheng is playing a mentally retarded person, and that's really the highlight of the film. That's Ken Cheng's performance. He's really good in it. He's really convincing. The film itself has a lot of good intention, but the direction is a bit heavy-handed. It's overly melodramatic. It's not subtle at all. Still, thanks to the performance of Ken Cheng, it's watchable, and I would still advise you to watch it, but don't expect a great film either. It has still many flaws, and it's mostly for Ken Cheng's performance that it's worth to check. Chow Yun-fat as a supporting part in it, he's okay, he's doing the job, but clearly if you are watching the film for Chow Yun-fat, you are not, I mean, you won't have much to watch there. He has really a small supporting part, and the highlight of the film is Ken Cheng. The same year, he appeared in another Shaw Brothers production, one of the last one, in Woman, directed by Stanley Kwan, and that was, if I'm correct, the very first film directed by Stanley Kwan after he had been the assistant director for many of the new wave directors. Woman is a very simple story. It's basically Chow Yun-fat and Cora Miao, if I remember correctly once again, divorcing, and that's it. That's the story of the film, but it's handled with all the subtlety and all the care we can expect from Stanley Kwan, so it's still very recommended. It's very realistic, it's very well done. The characters are really convincing, very well interpreted, obviously, and Chow Yun-fat is really good in it. So that's one of the films which is a bit forgotten because it was produced by the show at the very end of their existence, and it has kind of been forgotten since because of that. But I really advise you to try to track it down and watch it. It's a really good film. 86, so we are moving to one of the most important years for Chow Yun-fat's career. But I will deal with a movie which he did that year, which is less famous, which is Hearty Response. And it's actually so not much famous that I don't remember much of it myself. I think there was some kind of rape scene on Joey Wong, and she has some kind of tattoo, but maybe I'm mixing things there. I think it was very messy films as Hong Kong cinema could do during that time. But I really don't have much memory of it, so I won't develop, and I will move to the next film, which is Seventh Curse. It's a really fun film, a crazy adventure, full of action, full of comedy, full of blood, a bit of eroticism also. So basically, you have all the ingredients you can opt for if you want an entertaining show. It's a very fun film. The part of Chow Yun-fat is quite limited though, and for a good reason, because Chow Yun-fat was not supposed to appear in the film. He wasn't in it at all. It was the decision of the producer Choi Lam, who decided that the movie was not commercial enough, which is crazy. I think the movie was already very commercial. But anyway, he wanted to capitalize on the success of A Better Tomorrow, and so he asked Chow Yun-fat to appear in the film, and so they shot a couple of scenes at the very beginning and at the very end in order for Chow Yun-fat to appear in the film and get even more commercial value. So his participation is limited, and it's a bit stupid, let's be honest, the way he arrives at the very end of the film in order to kill the main bad guy with a bazooka. It's ridiculous. It's completely over the top, but it's fun. It's part of the craziness of the film, and we are happy to see him anyway. So The Seventh Curse is a really high recommendation for me. For Chow Yun-fat or not, you should watch it. It's a lot of fun. And so 86 is a very important year for Chow Yun-fat because of A Better Tomorrow. So I assume that you have all watched A Better Tomorrow. That's one of the greatest Hong Kong film. It's one of the greatest Chow Yun-fat's performance as this broken hero who finds back his dignity, fighting for his friends. I mean, that's a great performance. He was more of a supporting part originally, but because John Woo really liked his performance, and because there were a couple of problems with Dick Lung also, his part became bigger and bigger, and he became the symbol of the A Better Tomorrow series. And that gave us a great performance, a great film, but I think the way he kind of absorbed the series to him was detrimental in a way to the series in general. But I will come back to that when I will discuss Better Tomorrow 2 and A Better Tomorrow 3. In this film anyway, that's the great Chow Yun-fat, the Chow Yun-fat we love, who is able to show the best of him, to show the worst of him, to show every facet of his talent, is really outstanding. And of course, if you haven't watched A Better Tomorrow, just stop this video and go watch it right now. So because of the success of A Better Tomorrow, of course, Chow Yun-fat became a very sought after actor, and he appeared in a lot of films. One of them was The Lunatics. The Lunatics was one of the first directorial effort from Derek Yee, who was mostly an actor back then. And in The Lunatics, he deals with the work of social workers. It's a very good film, very interesting because it has a more socially conscious viewpoint than what you expect from most of the Hong Kong film of the period. So I really recommend it. It has a 4-star cast. A lot of very famous actors appear in small parts, and that's the case of Chow Yun-fat, who plays a mentally retarded person with also some violent tendencies. So it's almost a cameo in a way, but it's nice to see him, and the film itself is a great film, so you should check it out. Still in 86, he appeared in another film by Tony Ho, which was Dream Lovers. Dream Lovers was based on the Terracotta Warriors. The Terracotta Warriors had been discovered a few years before, and it had been a hot topic, and it has been used on a couple of films during that period as a subject. And so here it's a love story dealing with reincarnation from the time of the original Qing Emperor, the first Emperor of China. It is a Tony Ho film, so it has a lot of sensitivity. It's really a romantic love story, and I think it's a very efficiently made one. It's very convincing. It's a bit slow when it comes to the rhythm, but I think it has a lot of quality. The film also has Brigitte Lin, Lam Ching-ha, as the main co-star alongside Chow Yun-fat, and I would recommend it. As I said, I think Tony Ho is a very underappreciated director, and his films are always interesting to watch, and this one is no exception. So if you have the opportunity, watch it. The same year, Chow Yun-fat appears in Nepal Affairs, directed by Ching Siu-tung. This one was an ambitious attempt by Ching Siu-tung to do something contemporary and also romantic at the same time, a bit in the same spirit as Dream Lovers in a way, but with a bit more action because it's Ching Siu-tung. But the result, unfortunately, is disappointing. The romantic part doesn't really work. I think Ching Siu-tung is really trying too hard on that, and it shows. It lacks natural, unfortunately, and the action scenes with Dick Y in Central are half convincing. It's not a complete disaster. It has some qualities. Chow Yun-fat is fairly convincing, but that's not a very good film. Yeah, not really a high recommendation on my list. So we move to 1987. And of course, in 1987, Chow Yun-fat appeared in A Better Tomorrow 2, the sequel of A Better Tomorrow. As you most likely know, he appears as the twin brother of Mark, the character he was playing in the first film. I have very mixed opinion of A Better Tomorrow 2. I really love, of course, the final gunfight. The final gunfight is great, one of the greatest, directed by John Woo. It's really super impressive, and there are a couple of very good scenes. I think the introduction of Dean Shek is actually quite convincing. I don't want to spoil too much, but one very important scene with Leslie Cheung and his wife is really good too. But aside from this couple of scenes, the rest of the movie, I'm really not convinced by it. I was never convinced by the story of a twin brother to Chow Yun-fat. As I said when I was talking about A Better Tomorrow, I really don't think that Chow Yun-fat should have become the alpha and the omega of the A Better Tomorrow series. I think the A Better Tomorrow series was really based also on the relationship between Dick Lung and Leslie Cheung. That was really the core of the story, and it should have remained. And the character of Chow Yun-fat became really too central to the story, in my opinion. So A Better Tomorrow, it has also some very embarrassing performance. I mean, I like the way Dean Shek appear in the beginning of the film, but all the orange scenes, I mean, it's pretty ridiculous. And so that's A Better Tomorrow too, in my opinion. That's some great things there and some very bad things also. So it makes for some kind of interesting ride, I guess, but I would not call it a good film. Still, even if I have reservation about it, if you are a Chow Yun-fat fan, if you are a John Woo fan, you have to watch it. It's obvious. But really not my favorite Chow Yun-fat movie or my favorite Chow Yun-fat performance in all his filmography. The same year, in 1987, he also appeared in Prison on Fire. So I'm going to start with Prison on Fire because that's the first one I have on my list, which is taken from HKMDB. But of course, the first film he did for Ringo Lam was actually City on Fire. So Prison on Fire is part of this On Fire series. That's the second part between City on Fire and School on Fire. It's obviously a prison film. I'm not very fond of prison film in general because we tend to see always the same things in them. But having said that, this one is done with a lot of care. It's a good one. It's a good story. The characters are well defined, and of course with strong performances from Chow Yun-fat amongst others. So Ringo Lam, back then, he was really in his prime. I mean, from City on Fire until the mid-90s, that's when he delivered the best of his work. So it's obviously a film you have to watch if you like Chow Yun-fat. And I will finish this first part of this commentary on the filmography of Chow Yun-fat with Flaming Brothers, directed by Joe Chung. So Flaming Brothers is obviously one of those exploitation films made in order to capitalize on the success of A Better Tomorrow. But what I argue in my book when it comes to cops and gangster film, Flaming Brothers is, in my opinion, one of the best one of this sub A Better Tomorrow. Why? Because Joe Chung managed to really keep the spirit of the heroic bloodshed in the relationship between Chow Yun-fat and Alan Tang, and he has, of course, the gunfights we can expect from such films. And at the same time, he also managed to bring his own personality to the story, in the way Chow Yun-fat wants to go away from this world of gangsters, and he develops a relationship with Pat Ah, and I think it works pretty well in the film, and that allows us to see Chow Yun-fat into another style of performance, not just the macho hero, but also his more romantic side, which we already had seen in some of the previous film, like Dream Lovers. But if you didn't see Chow Yun-fat in this kind of parts, in this kind of role, then Flaming Brothers would be a good way to discover it, and that's basically a good exploitation, a good hero film in an exploitative way, with the most respect I can have for that. So I would actually quite recommend it. It's a nice little film with a good performance from Chow Yun-fat. And that's it for this first part of the commentary of Chow Yun-fat's filmography. There will be 2 more of this video, and I'm not sure when it will be published, but just wait for it. It will come soon enough, and I will see you in some other video anyway. Until then, watch more films with Chow Yun-fat, and let me know if you agree with my recommendation or if you disagree. Let's have a discussion about one of the greatest actors of Hong Kong cinema. See you very soon.